Froggy once saw a customer get angry about parking spots. The customer demanded to Froggy's boss that the staff park away from the building. The employee parking spots were on the west end of the building, while the doors to go into the building were on the north side. The north side had a big row of empty parking spaces they could use with a much shorter walk to the front doors, but for some reason they wanted the west end parking spots. Froggy's boss gave in to the demand, forcing all employees to park in the back lot on an incline, which is dangerous in the winter. All this so that one customer could park in one spot. A few months later, the customers started parking on the north end anyways, so the employees pretty much got shafted for no reason at all.
I was working with this dude at my first ever job, and we were given the task of putting out Christmas stuff around the store. Well, I thought we were all done, but when I went and checked the back, I found one last massive box of stuff that still needed to be put out. I picked the box up, I carried it over to where we were working, and the guy I was working with immediately said, "Yo, what's in the box?" I just looked at him straight in the eye, and I said, "Your mom." There was an awkward pause for a moment, and then he said, "Dude, that's not cool. My mom died last week in a car accident." There was another long and very awkward pause. He stared at me, and I stared at him while holding the box. Suddenly, though, he bursted out laughing, saying he was just kidding and that he was just pulling my leg. And then I started laughing too, and I told him, it's so funny, like, I didn't even care. That caused him to go silent again. It was great.
Back in the days before caller ID, Slaptam used to pick names with addresses from the phone book to prank call. He'd call them and say he was from the local electricity company and that a nearby accident had crossed the power lines with the phone lines. He said a technician was untangling the mess and that it was critical they didn't answer their phone for the next 2 hours. If they did, the person calling them could be zapped by heavy voltage. Once the person on the other line accepted the story, Slaptam would hang up and wait. A few minutes later, he would call back to see if they'd pick up. If they didn't answer, Slaptam would just keep calling and calling until they got so annoyed by the non-stop ringing that they had to pick it up. As soon as they said hello, Slaptam would scream like he was getting painfully electrocuted and listen to the person on the other end freak out.
Once Doobie was taking a nice afternoon stroll around the neighborhood. She noticed a woman across the street looking at her, but she didn't think much about it. A few minutes later, the woman had crossed the road and was power walking to catch up to Doopy. When she caught her, she tapped Doopy on the shoulder and enthusiastically said, I think your hair would look wonderful on my wig stand." Doopy didn't even know what to say to that. She was sure it was meant to be an innocent comment, but the woman's enthusiasm and the fact that she crossed the street just to say that really creeped her out.
When Dolan was 8 years old, he liked to play outside with the other kids in the neighborhood. One day, he was having so much fun that he stayed out past his curfew. An hour or so later, Dolan's mom heard a knock at the door. She opened it and saw a neighbor standing there with her son standing sheepishly behind him. The neighbor told her that he had just caught Dolan peeing on his fence. Unfortunately, this neighbor was the only African American in the entire neighborhood, so it looked really bad. Dolan meant nothing by it. He just really needed to go.
It's true. I'll pee anywhere.
The neighbor was a great sport about it, but Dolan's mom was still really embarrassed.
One day, Gurgak decided to text his girlfriend to see how she was going. He remembered she was having lunch with her mum that weekend, so he thought it'd be nice to say hi to your mum for me. But Gurgak had a brain malfunction and accidentally sent the message to one of his friends by mistake. This wouldn't normally be a big deal, except his friend's mum had just died 2 days earlier. His friend really didn't enjoy the painful reminder of the situation. Gurgak now double checks all his messages before hitting send.
While returning from vacation in Wisconsin Dells, Melissa and Ladybot were driving in their van when suddenly it started to gain speed without explanation. Melissa pressed both claws down on the brakes, but they did absolutely nothing. She had to shut the engine off and glide onto a side road for a mile while gravity slowed them down from 97 miles an hour. The freaky part is that there was no explanation, and the car hasn't done it since. Knock on wood. When Pringle was little, he loved watching his favorite TV shows, including Pokemon. While watching the show, he thought that if he could break the screen, he could go into that world. So he went to the garage to find a bat. The next time his favorite show came on, he smashed the TV screen. And of course nothing happened, and Pringle was left with broken glass that he stepped on. His parents rushed into the room when they heard the smash, and immediately they called 911, and Pringle was sent to the hospital. When his mother asked him why he smashed the TV, Pringle replied that he thought it was a portal to the Pokemon world.
My fiancé decided to propose to me on Christmas Day at Disneyland, and while that sounds like a dream come true, it was a nightmare. It was 10 times more crowded than usual. And the moment we walked in, the metal detector caught something in his jacket, which made his plans very obvious. The people were really rude, the rides took hours to wait for, the food was expensive, and by the time the fireworks were supposed to start, I was sore, exhausted, and cold. Then, to top it all off, the fireworks were canceled due to high winds. And I knew that was the moment he wanted to propose, so he ended up settling on proposing to me behind the big Christmas tree in town square. And while it was an absolute disaster, I knew it wasn't his fault, and to be honest, it was way more memorable this way. Plus, it perfectly sums up our imperfect, dysfunctional relationship. Of course, I said yes.
Spincess takes a public bus to school, so she's seen more than her fair share of weird stuff. Like one time when a crazy religious guy boarded the bus. Spincess and her friend were quietly doing their Spanish homework when the crazy man shouted, "Hello everyone, my name is Nimrod, and I was chosen by God to save y'all from the fiery pits of hell." After going on about the end times, he pointed to Spincess and her friend and shouted, "We must save these sinful children. The woman who marries me will be blessed by Christ himself. Do I have any takers?" Spincess and her friend put their homework away and awkwardly stared out the bus window, praying it would be their stop soon. When Kyle M. was in 8th grade, about halfway through the year, someone began vandalizing the bathrooms. Some kid was apparently shoving granola bars into the toilets. This actually broke most of the toilets and occurred in every bathroom. The teachers were positive that it was a boy in Kyle's class, although there wasn't any proof. They questioned every single dude in the classroom, but nobody admitted to it. About a week later, it was still going on. When Kyle went to the bathroom, he saw a little 6th grade girl in a bunny hoodie in the guy's bathroom. She ran out of the stall with an evil glare on her face and scared the crap out of him. Kyle went into the stall, and it was overflowing with granola bars. So, the little bunny girl was the culprit all along. We should have known.
Shima used to think that if two people pushed their bellies together, they'd make a baby. So obviously she thought that getting pregnant was inevitable because mummies and daddies always slept in the same bed. So what if their bellies touched while they were sleeping, and the next morning the mum became pregnant? Naturally, when her mum told her that people could choose when they wanted to have a baby, she was totally baffled. Pelvises? What is this nonsense?
Slapped Ham has worked at 2 different fast food restaurants, so he's seen his fair share of weird and stupid customers. By far, the dumbest order he's ever had happened at his first job. An old man came in and ordered a hamburger with cheese. Since the only difference between the hamburger and the cheeseburger was the cheese, Slapped Ham just tapped the cheeseburger button. When he read the old man his order, he got all pissy that cheeseburger was typed instead of hamburger with cheese. Slapped Ham explained to him several times that a cheeseburger was a hamburger with cheese and that he'd get the exact same thing regardless, but he refused to listen. He wanted his hamburger with cheese, and he would be damned if he had to be corrected by a then 17-year-old working minimum wage. At some point, Slapped Ham was so fed up with him that he ended up going back into the order, voiding the cheeseburger and punching in a hamburger with cheese, which automatically changed to cheeseburger because apparently the register is more reasonable than an old man. Surprisingly, the old man didn't complain about his receipt showing that he had ordered a cheeseburger.
When Ladybot was real young, she didn't quite understand that she didn't need to take all her clothes off to go to the bathroom. So when she was at a party, she went off to use the bathroom and took off all her clothes like usual. Suddenly someone walked in without knocking and she just sat there on the toilet completely clueless. He ran back out, and when she got out, the guy immediately apologized. She awkwardly apologized back. And that was the day she had the crazy idea to just take down her underpants and not get completely naked whenever she used the toilet. There's much less risk of exposing all your electronic bits when you do that.
Alyssa was recently on a date with a guy and decided to play a bit of Pokemon Go while they walked home. When they got to her front door, she invited him in for some cold water as it was a hot summer night and they had just walked a mile. She nervously blurted, "Sir, do you want to come inside, drink some water, maybe let me get a Pikachu? Get it? Pikachu?" He just kind of stared at her and said, "No, I'm good, thanks." She was hoping a bad pun would loosen the mood, but she was wrong.
When Doopy was a young girl, she was watching TV with her family. There was a news story about kids being abducted in a nearby neighborhood. Her cousin who was at the house decided to give her some advice just in case Doopy ever came into contact with a crazy child abductor. He told her that she should stand up and fight, and that she could make a weapon out of anything, including her own feces. It was some slightly extreme advice. She wondered if she would even have time to take a dump if she was being abducted. Maybe she could shit her pants and throw her pants at the abductor, but it's a bit odd.
When Dolan's brother was 10, his family had recently moved into a house and had lived there for a few months. It was the first time he didn't have to share a room with his brother. At first, Dolan's brother would leave the door to his room open at night and just ignore the creepy dark hallway until he fell asleep. One night, though, he woke up and looked at the wall of the hallway, and there on the wall was a white figure that looked kind of like a woman in a nightgown. He asked,
"Mom?"
but got no reply. It just stood there and didn't move. Because he had a deathly fear of ghosts, for some reason, Dolan's brother thought the best idea was to walk into it head on to see what it was. After doing that, he realized that it was moonlight perfectly projecting itself into a human figure onto the wall. Even though it was only moonlight, he still keeps his bedroom door closed to this day because he doesn't want to see that hallway at night anymore. It also didn't help recently when his neighborhood friends had told him that they'd seen the same kind of thing in their houses in the past couple of years.
Tolop was sweeping the floor in his dad's bookshop one afternoon. Then suddenly a customer came in through the door and said, "You're doing it all wrong." He grabbed Tolop's hand and said, "Hold the broom like this. You'll gain more leverage." Tolop then said he preferred his own technique better. As the guy walked out of the door, he said to Tolop, "Trust me." Tolop yelled back and said, "Are you even going to buy anything?" The man walked back and said, "No, I'm not. It just frustrates me how people are doing so many things wrong." And finally, he left. He then came back the next day and purchased a book called How to Do Everything Perfectly.
Legna met a girl online during his sophomore year of high school. She ended up living in the same city as him, and they hit it off pretty well and talked online for a while. One day, they decided to meet up at a mall for their first date. It was his first real date, and he was really excited and nervous. When he found the girl at the mall, he was really shy and awkward the whole time, but ended up getting his first kiss that day. He thought the date went really well considering the situation. She seemed happy, and Legna was definitely happy. Later that same day, she broke up with him over text. The day after that, he saw online that she became a lesbian and was dating a girl. She didn't even wait a while.
Ladybot was at a football game with her older sister when she heard some old lady cheering loudly for a specific player. The lady turned and said, "Hey little girl, the number he has is my favorite number. If you didn't know that, I don't know you. Did you know?" Ladybot was so confused. She replied,
No, I don't know.
The lady looked at her with the deadliest stare she ever saw. Suddenly she said, Go away! Stranger danger! Call the cops! Lady's sister looked at her weirdly and said, Hey lady, instead of telling us to go away, how about you tell yourself that too? The lady looked at her with the same stare she gave Ladybot. Fine, but you will pay, she said, then walked away. But she stared at them the whole time. Luckily, they never saw or heard from her again.
After getting her hair cut, Mimi went to a store with her mom. In one of the aisles, a bigger girl grabbed her hair and pulled her to the front of the store. She didn't get too far because Mimi's mom stepped in front of her and asked, Excuse me, what are you doing with my daughter? It was then that the girl looked at Mimi, and then at a laughing girl dressed exactly like Mimi with the same haircut. They were sisters, and the younger one was being mischievous by running between the aisles and getting her older sister mad.
In Doopy's last year of elementary school, she had a crush on this cute boy who liked drawing. She was always too shy to talk to him, so her friends came up with a weird plan to get him to notice her. They told Doopy to sit near her crush at lunchtime. She then had to take one of the carrots that she had for lunch and pretend to choke on it. Doopy knew this was crazy, but she went along with it anyway. Just as she was biting into her carrot, Doopy hesitated and thought,
Wait a minute. I might die from this.
Because of this, she accidentally gulped down the carrot without biting, and she started choking for real. Everyone in the cafeteria stared as Doopy's face turned purple. Her friends thought she was faking it, so they didn't do anything to help. Luckily, a nearby teacher came and saved her, but as for Doopy's crush, he just stood by watching in shock.
Senpai will never notice me. A few years ago, Mikhailin was working at a store that sold cameras. One day, a woman came in yelling that she wanted a refund for a camera because all of the pictures it took were completely black. He asked her to show him how she took the pictures when he noticed that she left the lens cap on. He showed her this and took a picture showing that the camera indeed worked fine. Instead of thanking him or taking her new photography skills home, she aggressively accused Mikhailin of using witchcraft. He told her that he was unable to give her a refund on the condition of witchcraft, and she left the store yelling to herself.
Well, Spinal Palm's mind can be pretty chaotic. What would happen is that he would imagine many scenarios, worlds, and etc. in his head. If he imagined that he was talking to a character or characters from an anime or some other show, or if he was narrating several different things in his head or reenacting events in his head, or etc., Spinal Palm would end up whispering by accident. Nobody would notice it except his brother and his dad. Also, nobody would be able to make out anything on whatever he was saying. His brother would get all snippy at him saying,
Stop whispering, it's really annoying.
His dad would say,
Who you talking to? Do you have an imaginary friend?
This would piss Spinal Palm off every time his dad said that, because that wasn't the case at all. He would respond,
I'm not talking to anyone.
This happens almost all the time.
When Shima was a kid, her family lived in a really close community. Everyone knew their neighbors were drug dealers. When Shima was 13, her mum screamed, but shut up real quick. Like any curious kid, she went to the window to peek out. There were 35 SWAT and ATF guys using the front yard as a staging area, and her mum screamed because one popped up right in front of the window. Apparently the neighbors were not only selling drugs, but also making them in the basement of their house. They had a bunch of guns to keep people out. About 10 years later, it happened again. Only the one making the drugs ended up being the landlord. He just used what was left to make a grow site. Shima hopes they have the same jail because the landlord was the one who turned the neighbors in. Evidently, he thought it would be a great idea to start doing the exact same thing that got the people who were in his building arrested.
Nixium's parents were friends with everybody on the block, and naturally Nixium chatted with them from time to time. Their next door neighbor, in particular, was very friendly. He was always so nice and helpful that Nixium quickly began to trust him as family. One day, he asked Nixium to come over to his backyard. When he got there, his neighbor said he'd give him $50 if he poured a gallon of cooking oil on his head and back. An odd request, but Nixium complied, and after pouring the slightly viscous slime, he thanked him profusely and gave him the slightly moist $50 bill. Nixium asked him about the odd request the next day. Turns out he was wasted, totally drunk. He remembers that he had a good reason, but couldn't recall what that reason was. To this day, no one can answer the question. One of the coolest things the sibling did for me was when we went to the Atlantis Paradise Resort in the Bahamas. This was one of the most famous and popular resorts to date, and it was really, really nice. I was only 11 years old at the time, and I barely knew really what was going on, but I did like the scenery and everything around it. It was during at that time that we noticed that there was a pool park in the Atlantis. So we went to the Atlantis pool park. The pool park was amazing. It had swings, it had slides, it had everything a child my age could dream of in a pool park. So by the time I noticed all of the pools, there was one up top. It was really high up and you had to take ladders to get there. I got up to the pool and it was pretty shallow, so it was perfect for my height. Across from that I saw a pool, but it was on a lower level, but you had to take a slide to get there. So I took the slide, and as I was landing into the lower pool, I didn't notice it was actually a deep end pool. So I landed inside and I started drowning. I started flaying my arms and just asking, please help, help, help. But I drowned too quick. I was already deep underwater and I started believing that it was it. I was gonna die, and that was pretty much it. At that very point in time, my sister rescued and saved my life. She pulled me out of the water and put me to sit down afterwards. I was amazed I actually lived after that day, because I swear it was time for me to go. And after that, I gotta say, that was probably one of the coolest things my sibling ever did for me, and I'll never forget it.
Doopy was sitting in her living room when she decided it was time to go to sleep. All of a sudden, a dark figure appeared crawling across the floor. She assumed it was her sister trying to scare her, but then the figure stood up into the shape of a twisted man standing over her. It made the weirdest screeching sound she'd ever heard. She got down on all fours and ran out of the room. She hid under her covers and waited until morning. She never found out what it was, but she doesn't sit in the living room by herself anymore.
Zaraganba was walking to school with a friend when they saw some guy hiding behind a bush. They walked by staring at him, and as they did, he got up and said,
"Oh, no, not the right body type."
Later, Zaraganba heard on the news that a guy from his neighborhood had been on the run from the cops. He and his friends are certain it was the man they saw that day.
When Zaraganba was 15 years old, he decided to go bungee jumping. His friends went bungee jumping all the time and assured him that it was totally safe. He was pretty nervous, but went ahead with it anyway. But when it came to his turn, Zaraganba wasn't checked for the safety protocols properly, and when he finally jumped, the rope disconnected and he plummeted straight into the water below. Luckily, he survived, and the bungee company got into a huge amount of trouble for endangering his life.
Dolan and his wife, Gooby, went to New York for a little getaway. On the second day they were there, they decided to see the Empire State Building. Their hotel was only about a mile away, so they decided to walk. While they walked, they saw a man being walked like a dog in his underwear by an overweight woman wearing a Pepsi shirt. The weirdest part was that no one paid attention to them, as though it was an everyday thing.
When Shima was about 7 years old, she was staying at her best friend's house. They got bored and decided to start a fire in her driveway, just as it was getting, kind of dark. Her friend grabbed her dad's lighter that he kept outside, and she gathered some pine needles. They saw some rocks around her basketball ring and decided that they were just the right rocks for making a campfire. Shima gathered up the pine needles into a group, and they had the lighter ready. Her friend brought the rocks over one by one until they had a perfect little campfire circle. They started the fire and were happy with their creation. But they unfortunately were not smart enough to realize that the rocks were the only things keeping that basketball ring from falling over. And so, it fell and it smashed right into Shima's dad's truck. The alarm on the truck went off and they both screamed. Shima tried her best to put out the fire while her friend got the basketball ring off the car. Shima was still in the process of stomping out the fire when she saw him, the dad just standing there, staring at them.
One time Doopy was out with her 4-month-old son. They were on a bus when an old lady sat next to them. "Oh, a new baby. Must be my time to go soon." Unsure what to do, Doopy coughed and said,
Don't be daft.
She then proceeded to say, "Well, I have done everything on my bucket list. I have skinny dipped at 80, flew on a plane, skydived." Doopy zoned out until the old lady said, "Oh, and I fucked a 25-year-old last night." That's when Doopy thought she was nuts. Then the old lady pulled out a picture of a young man with one hand on her boobs and the other on her privates. Shocked and disgusted, Doopy got up and said,
That's just wrong on so many levels. You should be ashamed of yourself, you old crow.
With that, she took a little one and walked off the bus.
James Shark's older brother had an eating disorder that made him eat bizarre things like paper dunked in pickle juice or crayons with ketchup. He got a job at an auto repair shop, which was great because he likes cars. But one day, James Shark went to visit him at work and just saw him going ham on a truck tire trying to eat it. He was surrounded by ketchup packs and sugar packs. James Shark asked him,
"What the hell are you doing?"
His brother responded, "Well, he ain't gonna use it anymore." As if that explained it. Several months later, James Shark family got a call from his brother's boss telling them that the shop was missing a few tires. His family knew it was James Shark's brother, and when they went to talk to him about it, they found him curled over, puking his stomach out. Apparently, he thought that since the tire tasted fine, he'd wash it down with gasoline.